Hello everyone, this is Rotalice. I would like to congratulate you on your recent download of one of my models. That is the reason for this video. It has come to my attention, or at least I'm assuming, that a lot of people may not be 100% familiar with the way the models that I have made work, the rigs that I set up, that I've created, function, and that might be a hindrance. I know, it's kind of crazy. I don't know why I expected people to kind of get this without actually being told how they work. Anyway, this video is just to inform people of the process by which to manipulate these. This is a terrible intro. Let's jump right into it. Alright, so at first, once you've opened a model file, you're going to want to look at the rig. This then is the character rig. Each one of them has pretty much the same rig. There are a few differences, which I'll get into in just a moment. But to start with, all the character models have an IKFK sort of rig that allows for manipulation, animation, and other things like that. It's important to know, first off, that each model starts in IK mode. And what do I mean by IK mode? Well, it means the way it's controlled. Now, a lot of the time when you work with Blender, or any sort of animation program for that matter, when you grab the rig, you normally grab the arm bones, which are marked here. They're kind of circles instead of, the sticks that usually appear. That's only because I made a whole lot of custom shapes to make it seem like a little bit easier to work with. But yeah, usually you grab the arm bones and you rotate from there. And you can rotate any of the bones using the R button. But if you try to do that here, you'll notice nothing happens. And you might be wondering, well, what have you sold me, Rotalice? This is no good. What's happening here? I don't understand. Well, that's because, like I said, the arm is in IK mode. The IK FK switcher, this is terrible, hide this, is right up here. So this is what controls the arm's mode. And when it's in IK mode, that's inverse kinematics mode, which means that essentially the arm is controlled from the hand, which is like good for when you want to have the character's hand up against something, and you control it, in this case, by grabbing it. And then you bends and it rotates and torques all of the other bones automatically. The only one that doesn't turn, of course, being the bone that you grabbed. You can rotate the hand in any mode, but when you grab it, that's what sort of does things. And that's good if you want to, like, putting her hand on a desk or out in front of her and flat. And it's useful, I think, a lot of the time for when you're not trying to animate so much as you are trying to pose something. But that's my personal opinion, and I'm not much of an animator, so I really can't say. Some bones do work in this mode. But if you're more traditional with this sort of thing, and you want to control the arm the old-fashioned way, which is not at all a real term, I'm just pulling something out of a hat, you can go up here, and you can change the control by using one of the switches. Switches are a thing that I use a lot around here, so that's just something to get used to. So, yes, you can control the left arm with IKL, that's this particular toggle, and the right arm with the R toggle, or the right toggle. And you can switch it over to FK. And once it's over here, you'll notice that you can no longer grab this anymore. You can still rotate it, but you can't move it around the way I was just moving it around a moment ago. Now you've got to control the arm from the actual joints. So this is the upper arm, and this is the forearm. So we've changed the influence, and now you can see that it controls normally. But because these are independent of one another, you do not actually, if you want to have the left arm, let's say, still in IK mode, you can still control it that way. And you can have the right arm controlled in FK, which is forward kinematics, by the way, for those of you interested. in what these things mean. And you can rotate it like that. You can still rotate, like I said. And you'll notice there are differences in, gains and setbacks in both. But just know that you have the ability to do both whenever you like. And that is the IK-FK switching system. The same can be done with the fingers right now. And then by default in all models, well, except for Rouge, the fingers are in IK. And it can cause some trouble. Like if you move it like that, that's an issue. And you'll have to do some extra twisting around to get things to work exactly the way you want them to. But I find IK really good for, like, when you're trying to just sort of like zero in on something. Like, say you wanted Sally to be grabbing or holding an item or an object. It's easy to wrap her fingers around, in my opinion at least, using the IK switch, which is the only reason it's in here, because I think it's a good idea. Now, of course, if people don't like it, you can always turn it off using a switch called the IK-FK finger control, hands left and right. It's the same as the one up here, but it just controls all of the fingers on the left and right hands individually. So I want to do that. Now her fingers go straight because they're no longer being controlled by the IK bone in there, and you can rotate them however you please, and you can go joint by joint just the way you usually would, say like what we did with the arm earlier, and then look at that, or don't look at that. Depends on how you feel. Any case, there is that. Switches on models are actually also very useful. I'm gonna undo all of this by selecting everything and hitting the Alt G button to Alt grab, and then Alt R, and there we go. Of course, that also does some things that you'll see in a moment with their facial controls. But down here, switches are also good for making certain things visible and invisible. Sally Acorn comes equipped with her blades, as seen in the comics. So I have her light blades that you can toggle on the left one, and you can toggle on the right one. And I thought it would be a good idea to be able to do one or the other. So that will also show up in renders. Whenever you want to render the character, that'll just appear there. So that's another use for these switches as well. The legs down here are always in IK mode. There is no FK version, so you grab her foot and you can lift it up. She has a foot roll controller as well, just like my older models, like the CLA models. I like to think these are more refined than those, but you can rotate that. You can get a lot of different kind of movements and poses out of the feet as well. You can grab the toe bones, or the toe control bones at least, and just basically have at it. And this is the waist. Essentially, it's the center for all the IKs and the legs, and you can move it however you want. And this is basically the simpler stuff. These rings are really just to show where the bones are inside of the character model, because a lot of the time the rig would be obscured by the model itself. This way, some parts of it become visible and easier to access. So we're gonna select all these things. Oops. And we're gonna Alt grab those things. Also bear in mind that these are the targets, so that when you do move her feet around, these actually decide which way her knees are pointing. Very important to keep that in mind. And the same with these decide where her elbows are pointing in IK mode. During FK mode, these don't do anything. They're just sort of there. But keep that in mind when you're working on this, when you're working with one of these models. Now, I'm not going to go through every single bone and what every bone does, because a lot of this stuff is self-explanatory. Like when it comes to the ring type things, you can pretty much guess that that's that controls the fingers. These control the arms, and you'd be right every time. This controls her tail, and we're gonna go up here. This is a little bit different. I used to put the character facial controls, and I'll show you that in a moment with Rouge, on the character's face, but I've recently decided that maybe that's not the best way to do this. So I've offset them a bit. They control the same expressions the exact same way they always have. They're just no longer located on the face. And the cool thing about this is like a little face anchor type thing. You can move it anywhere. So if you happen to want to have Sally's face in a side profile and you want to look at the face head on, you can rotate that thing like that. And you can make her smile. And you can make her open her mouth. You don't even have to be like looking at it directly. You can see how your work is affected essentially, right there in the frame, without having to constantly go back and check and look at everything like that. Also, I gave her a little nose area, so you can kind of move that around. It's not super important, but I thought it might help. So that controls her facial expressions and that kind of stuff. So her eyelids, everything's pretty much got one-to-one parity with certain parts of her face. You can control her brows, and you can control all of these things. If you want to have extra control of the brows, I've also included these little bones here that are directly on the face to give her more depth of expression. If you want to look really surprised or like really kind of upset or sad, you got that kind of control. These little rings here control Sally's eyes. And pretty much what I'm showing you here is almost how every model works. These used to control things, and on some models they still do, but usually it just sort of lets you know where the eyes are. So you can kind of ignore this box because it's not even on all the models. And of course you've got the ear controls here. I'm going to move on to a character model that is slightly different in its facial setup. This is the one that's available for free on my Patreon page. If you're interested, there is a Riders Rouge here. Riders Rouge is an older model. She's got a few less of these abilities, so she's not quite as up to date as say Sally is. Even though technically I made Sally first, but I didn't actually put the same kind of rig in both characters. But you can see certain things like on and off switches for certain clothing, like her gloves. You can make those disappear if you want to look less have big old gloves on. And if you feel like the wings are in the way of a shot, you can turn those off. That's what these switches are for. These switches work in rendered mode as well as in real-time mode, like what we're looking at right now. So you don't have to worry about that. Another interesting thing about Rouge is, of course, her mouth controls are right there on her face. Like I said, she's an older model, an older character model, so she's not really as refined. I learned a lot of things from this model that helped me make the other models more refined. So they've all benefited from Rouge being like a generation 1. So I'm going to bring back the wings. Make sure that's turned all the way up to make sure that they render properly. And they're IK rigged themselves. Always IK. So like legs, they're IK. Rouge also has an IK FK switcher, and I'll show you a few differences with hers being a first generation type thing. She's like the very first model I made after the COA models. So she's got a few differences, but a few quirks. But yes, you can control the pitch of her wings using these bones. They're a little bit of a mess to handle, I'll be honest. And maybe this isn't the best way to do wings, but this is the only character I've ever done wings for. Only a character I've ever done that has wings, so maybe next time I'll do better and I'll update her or upgrade her in some way. Make her a little more flexible. Anyway, that's Rouge. And yes, so unlike Sally or any other model that you'll be able to download off of my page, Rouge does not have an IK-FK switch for her fingers. She only has IK fingers. And it's because I thought it was a better idea to do at the time over any other idea. I feel like I'm wrong about that, but just figured I'd let you guys know that she's a bit different because of this. This is a free model. Though I do intend to possibly update her with the FK fingers if enough people ask for it and care about it. You can always voice your opinion on my Patreon page and say, hey, we want this functionality. Add those finger rings, man. Put a ring on it. Any case. But much like the other character model, what I do with Sally, her bones look a little bit different, but they work essentially the same way. You can do the same IK-FK switching as you did with Sally. Oh, a very interesting difference between Rouge and other characters. Rouge has 3 mouths. And what do I mean by that? Rouge has that Sonic the Hedgehog side mouth. So it shows up on the right side here. It can also show up on the left. Using these switches, you can move that down, and it switches where her mouth is. So now it's on the left. And all the same bones work just the way they did before, but everything's on the left. And another cool thing, her teeth move individually of her jaw for some reason, but that's another thing, another quirk of her design, and her lips. So she also has a few less controls in her mouth as a result. But another cool thing is that if I do that on this side, right, those facial expressions, when I switch her mouth back over to the right, it takes, right? It's the same exact expressions being made. So thought that's pretty cool. And also, she has a center mouth. So I can turn all that off and turn on her center mouth. Her left and right mouth become invisible, and you can see that she's got a center mouth here, or like, a center of her face. And it's also in the same position. So pretty cool stuff, I gotta say. Not to toot my own horn too much here, but I think this is pretty useful. Another thing about Rouge here is that she's got... never mind what you just saw there. I don't know what happened to her textures. I'll fix it, don't worry. I'm pretty sure the one that you download from the Patreon page is actually fine. It's just for some reason that one doesn't have textures. But like I said, all the control bones for her eyes and things are located right here on her face. Now, whether or not that's helpful to you guys, you let me know, and I'll make a change. Because usually, this is how I used to do it all the time. This is how, in fact, I do it in my tutorial for Tails. But, if it's not useful to you, you let me know, and I'll never do it again. But, yeah. She's kind of a holdover. She's an artifact of an earlier time. Another interesting quirk about her fingers, just before we go, is that you can scale this and it automatically curls her fingers. Because this is how I learned how to do that first. So if you don't actually want to grab them from one point, you can just scale it in. Bring the finger in. It doesn't offer very much control, so that's an issue all in and of itself. So that's that. So this is essentially how to use these character models to move them around. I never told you guys about the bottom bone here. This bone actually essentially orients the character model, like you'll see in the very next model that I'm going to show you. And that's my most recent one, the star of the show here. Not really. Fiona, my most recent model, which I will show you a few other functions of these rigs that I make. Now, I've been recently using bendy bones to control tails that are very long tails that have the ability to be kind of expressive in their movement and squashy, stretchy type things. So I've added bendy bones, and these are little joints that help you control that bendy bone point. Give it a nice little squishiness to it. Make it feel a little more organic when you're animating that kind of stuff. You can control the character's movement through a scene by just grabbing this bone. They will pretty much stay in place because the object of the rig isn't moving. It's just the positioning of the bones in the rig. And this is all a bunch of gobbledygook that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But anyway, you can rotate this however you want. And, go to object mode. And you'll see that it's moved from the center, but it hasn't actually gone anywhere. But yeah, so those are those kinds of controls. And that's really all I wanted to show with that one in particular. There's nothing special here. As always, you want to start with the base. The waist is kind of like everything is kind of controlled right there. And you can get some pretty good movements just from that. And you can see how the IK rigging is affected. As Fiona's core moves around, you can see that the ends of the IK rigs, i.e. the hands in this particular example, and the feet actually, stay in one spot. And they stretch rather than coming along with it because they don't actually want to move. I'm making them move. And if you were to switch the IK and FK right here, then when you move it around, they just sort of T-pose all the way up and all the way down. Only thing that doesn't do that is the legs, but that's because the legs are pretty much designed not to move. In any case, that is, I think, everything that I wanted to cover when it comes to how to move the rigs around. The next part is a very important part, though, and that's called rendering. It's one thing to move the character around in the scene, do the poses, but if you can't make a picture, what's the point, right? So that's what we're going to show off right quick. Okay, so in Blender, when you want to make a render of anything, you want to check out this particular tab. You're going to have this part blue, that thing clicked in. This is all of your render options. By default, most of my models come with the square samples off, renders at 128 samples, and this is my own personal bias, but everything's set up for a Hilbert spiral with a 256 by 256 tile size when rendering. Now that is good for if you have a GPU, but if you don't have a GPU, you want to turn this off and go to CPU, and then you want to go to something more reasonable for a CPU rendering tile. This will take however many cores or threads that your CPU is capable of, and it'll make little tiny tiles, whatever size you need them to be. I'm told that 56, if it's 56 or it's 52, I think it's 52, actually, or something like that. 52 by 52 is the tile size you want, and the threads are 8, but you can actually decide how many threads you want. How much of your CPU you want to be used towards rendering an image is an important step. This is kind of like semi-advanced. It's not really, but it's like when you're doing cycles, it tends to be pretty heavy on, well, it's essentially making cycles. It's ray tracing almost. It's almost ray tracing. It's essentially just sort of like taking a picture of an engine and calculating all the light bounces back to where they come from. So important to keep that in mind. Like I said, it's all default to 256 by 256 and set up for a GPU because that's what I have in my computer. If you don't have a GPU, it'll automatically default to CPU, but these numbers down here, 256, are too large, so make sure to change them down to something more manageable for your system. And I usually do PNGs, but that's just because I like to do alpha channels. But JPEGs are fine; they work just as well. But I don't think they do. They don't do transparencies. I like to make a lot of transparencies. You might notice in my pictures, I just do transparencies on a background, and then I think that's high art. That's me. That's me. It's not you. Anyway, what else? Yes. So the next part of this is going to figure out your resolution. I'd like to do a 1920 by 1080. It's a good 16 by 9 aspect ratio. It's what most computers, most monitors are, unless you've got like one of those crazy quad displays. Anyway, that's basic high definition. And the next part is to just take a look at what you're going to be rendering. Here, I hit the 0 button, by the way. Numpad, 0 on the numpad just takes you into the camera view. Right now, I have it set up so that whenever you move around in the Blender window, I use the scroll wheel middle mouse button. I'll be linking a video in the description and probably on the screen here that'll show you how to actually move and control Blender, because it's kind of complicated. It's all weird because you'll notice when I select things, I don't use the left mouse. I was using the right mouse to select everything. You can see there in the bottom of the screen there that I'm not just grabbing. Blender's weird, man. I'm just saying. You can move around your view angle, and that'll move the camera. The camera's going wherever I want it to go. And you can look at a preview of what the rendered version of it is by hitting the, going down here where this little ball is. It's by default in material mode, but if you click on this, you can go up to rendered. That's the viewport shading. And this is what it'll look like. You don't see the rig, you don't see anything but what the model will end up looking like when it's done. And this is where you want to be. In order to render the actual thing, though, you hit the render button on the in this corner right here. You can see what I'm pointing at my screen, and you just tap that. It'll take you to the UV image editor window, and you'll see that it's making a render now. And it's making these big 256 by 256 tiles, which is fast for a GPU. But for a CPU, you might want to have them smaller, and they'll be more numerous, but it'll render faster, relatively speaking. Rather than having 8 of these going around your screen really slowly, you'll just want to make them smaller. And like I said, I default to 128 because it's pretty low. If you want something really, really high quality with no noise, you turn that number up, or you can turn on square samples. Of course, you turn on square samples with 128. That's 128 squared samples. So you'll be there all day. So don't do that. Anyway, there's our image of Fiona. It's just her in a T-pose. And you go in here, go to image. You can save as image, and you can basically save it wherever you want. If you haven't already made a place to put your renders, I suggest you make one. So rather than saying textures, you go and create a new directory. Click on that button. Hey, say renders. I like to put things in a place, even if it's not terribly orderly. It's just as long as it goes somewhere. And then you can name the image whatever you want. Call it Fiona T-pose. And there you go. And then you save the image. It might take a few seconds. And then now it's done. So now that's that part done. In a moment, I'm going to show you how to bring multiple character models into the same scene and do renders that way. Because a lot of the time, you don't want to just make a render of a single character. You want to have a bunch of characters together, for fun. Okay, so in order to bring in multiple characters from other files that you may have into another file that you have, well, it's very simple. Well, kind of simple. It's reasonable. It's reasonable. All right, check it out. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to the folder that you're in, the file that you're in, if you're in one already, and then save it as something else, because you never want to bring in character models into the same file. You want to keep it separate so that nothing you don't want saved gets saved to your clean, very nice character file. Say I've got nice pristine Fiona here. I don't want to mess her up with a bunch of other gobbledygook that I brought in from another folder or a scene that I created. Now I don't have my Fiona file anymore. Any changes that I make are now, stuck as Fiona. It's a big mess, and you'll have to delete everything else out of it. So a good idea is to save as something else. So say we call this, instead of Fiona Fox for Patreon, we call this Fiona Fox with friends. We'll say friends. It doesn't matter. As long as it's something that's distinguishable. And of course I want to save this somewhere else other than the Dropbox folder where I have all my patrons come to, because I don't want this impeding their life. And there we go. Put it in scenes. Fiona Fox with friends. And we save that as a Blender file. Now this is utterly distinct from the Fiona Fox file that we were dealing with now. It's in a different place, and it's got a different name. The original Fiona Fox file is fine. No problems. with that. So now we're going to do the next part. We want to bring in a character model. Let's say we want to bring in Blaze, and I want to go down and go to File, go to Append, and we're going to go and find out where in the world I keep that. That's in Requests and Commissions, and that's Blaze the Cat, and that's Blaze the Cat for Halloween. That never got finished. Blaze the Cat for Patreon. We go to Object, right? So what you want to do next is you want to go to Object, because Blaze is several objects. You'll see in a moment. So there's a couple of things that are not necessary, like a bunch of custom shapes that are in here, but we should be able to get around that by just going up into the search bar here and typing in Blaze. And it'll bring every relevant piece that is named Blaze. So I named Blaze Body, Blaze Coat, Blaze Cuffs, Blaze Eye Left, Blaze Eye Right, Blaze Head, Blaze Necklace. Eye trackers will come along, and so will the rig. So you don't have to click on those. They're automatically linked. And that's a problem. One day I'll find a way around it. But anyway, that's just how it is. We're going to go ahead and append from library, right? And now, here's Blaze. She's already selected. I'm going to go to object mode here. I'm going to try to move her over. So there's a issue there because Blaze's eyes are different than Fiona's, but that's not a problem at the moment. I don't need to move anything else. We're just going to go into pose mode, and for some reason this doesn't affect it, but yes. Interesting fact, you can move around Fiona with no problem. Her eyes don't move, but if you move Blaze in object mode, because the way her eyes are set up, it's different. I'm going to fix that one day. Don't rush me. Oh, it's just I learned something since I made Blaze, and she needs to be fixed. In any case, here they are together. They're around the same size, but obviously Blaze is gigantic, and these were made nowhere near each other, and that's why this is the case. I wasn't thinking about Fiona when I made Blaze, essentially is why this is the case. Alright, so you sort of like match their floor bones. Not quite. Around there, right? So now these two characters are in the same space. You can see that I brought in her head and body. I brought in her arms, and I brought in her coat, and I brought in all these things. These all had to come along. But essentially Blaze controls just like all the other characters do. Pretty much everything we've learned here is how to bring in models. You can bring in character pieces. Some character models are a little less clean, though. That's a thing that I've got to work on and figure out why that's happening. But say I want to bring in Sally to this scene, right? Go to append, find the model, get Sally body, Sally hair, Sally head, Sally eye, that rig. Right eye, vest. We'll leave those behind. We don't need them. So it brings in all this extra stuff. See all those extra things? These other custom shapes that I use for her bones, like special blade toggle on. You can see that's the object that I use for it. Anyway, going to move her to another layer altogether. And we are going to do a little cleaning up over here. So what you want to do is move it to another layer by hitting the M button, like you just saw. And then deselecting Sally. I will find a way to fix this so this won't be necessary for you in the future. But until that beautiful day, this is what we got to do. That's all the stuff that you don't want down here. So we just hit the delete button. Now that's gone forever. I mean, it's still there technically. Otherwise, these shapes would have disappeared. But there you go, right? And now that Sally has been fully rehabilitated, we can move her back to the others by hitting the M button, slapping on that thing, and now she's in the scene. Sally and Blaze are very similar, though, so they can't be moved unless they're moved along their axis. Or, not axis. Unless they're moved by their rigs. If you move the object mode rig, then it'll have the same problems that you saw with Blaze a moment ago. So now there they go. Turn on the texture mode there, and now you can see all the character models lined up. We're going to move to the camera, make sure everyone's in the picture. And cool thing about this is you can always rotate things, control the way the rigs are set up. And this is just to show you how to do this sort of thing. So these are these characters in this scene. There you go. And then you've got all these characters. We've got the same setup from the other render, because even though we saved this as a different file, it's essentially the same file when it comes to the setup. So all you got to do is hit the render button. There you go. It's going to take a little bit longer because there's more characters in the scene, and it's got to figure out what to do with all of them. Another reason to use CPU compute a lot of the time is if you have more RAM on your computer than you do on your graphics card, which is almost always going to be the case. There's never been a case where your GPU has more RAM, I don't think. But if it's just a better option, then you go ahead and use the CPU. Because if there's too many objects on screen or in the scene, then your GPU will just say, oh, CUDA error, it doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. If you need help setting up a CUDA, that could be another video, because I realize that sometimes that needs a little work. It doesn't work all the time, because you got to actually set it up in your user preferences. But anyway, that is more or less how to control the rigs and set up a simple render in Blender, specifically with the character models that I've made. I hope this video has been helpful, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Remember to check these models out on Patreon. Consider supporting me there. If you want to download these, they are available. Rouge you can get for free. Not a little bit of time, she's just always going to be free, whether or not I fix those fingers. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Rotalice, and you have been wonderful. Goodbye.
Rotalice, the 2 is silent.